basically the last time I was all about getting you to into like explaining, how the youth what do you call it, youth politics system works
Mm.
in Bergen at least, right?
Yeah, how it works.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I was just
because
I was just wondering, yeah.
essentially,
Yeah, go on, please.
no, yeah.
Right.
Um, essentially, what I would sort of say is one of the interesting things that we've done in Norway is that we've recognized that there are some parts of society that don't, even though we do live in a democracy, then you could still say there are certain parts of society whose voices aren't necessarily heard to the same degree in the democracy. So let's take three very concrete examples, yeah?
Yeah.
You have people who are too young to vote. That would be the youth. And they are, in order to make sure that they still have some form of a democratic voice, a youth council was formed to allow them to still take part in the democratic process, even though not being able to vote. And then there's another part, the other council, for example, the Disabled People's Council of Bergen, which is, another group of people who, even though maybe many of them can vote, maybe some of them don't vote, or maybe it's difficult. And so therefore they also have their own council to help them be a part of the democratic process. And then there's a seniors council for people who are, on the older side of the spectrum, to also allow them to feel as if they're a part of the democratic process. So that's something interesting that Bergen has done, is sort of recognize these three groups as especially maybe put at risk of not taking part in the democracy, and then doing everything they can to help them take part by giving them, their own counsel and their own voice.
Right. But what does that actually mean?
Well, so that means that there's sort of a balance, right? Because they can't let they can't give youth any direct forms of democratic power because uh, just the way the justice system works is that obviously we're too young to make huge decisions that impacts people's lives, and therefore we're not trusted to vote. However, uh, even though that may be true, the youth perspective on certain issues is still very relevant, and so that's why they made a youth council so that even though certainly they don't want us to vote, what they do want is sort of hearing the youth perspective on certain things. So if they're going to take a topic and let's say they're going to consider building a new playground for a school, then what they'll do is that they'll ask youth, or especially the youth council, for their opinion about that playground. So even though we don't directly get to vote, they sort of include us in the democratic process through finding areas where they want our input. But then the Council of Bergen has taken sort of one step beyond that, and it's allowed its members to broach their own subjects. So the old Youth Council of Bergen has now been shut down, and in accordance with Norwegian regional law, it's been replaced by a sort of more of a city council that'll go with a city government. But the principle is still the same, is that at least to some degree, the youth council is allowed to decide on its own topics that it wants to pursue, which opens up for another avenue because politicians are usually grown-ups, and so they're gonna have a different experience of the world that's going to lead them to consider different topics worth working on. And so once you let youth sort of decide their own topics to a larger extent, you're going to get a whole different set of perspectives, and they might broach entirely different topics.
Right, right. So you're not getting power, like you the council is not getting power, but they are basically getting heard by the in office officials.
Yes, they're getting certainly a seat at the table,
Right.
and then because if you're a grown-up politician, there's obviously so many cases for you to consider that it might be different to consider all possible viewpoints. And that's what I think is, the main purpose of these three councils is giving the viewpoint of the youth, giving the viewpoint of disabled people, and giving the viewpoint of elderly people, and that plays out with very real effect.